how do you guys review a time section now? Anyone can jump in here.
Usually like hide the answers that I got wrong.
Okay, so you do the section.
Yeah.
As you're going through the section, do you flag any of the questions? Okay. Yeah. And do you flag them to come back to them during the section or to review them afterwards?
Kind of both. I mean,
both.
I'll usually
Okay.
have a little time at the end left,
Mm-hmm.
and so if I feel unsure about an answer that I pick, I'll use that time at the end to go back and double check
them out. Yeah. Okay. So as I'm going through the section, generally the assumption is that you're not going to finish, right? Or you are going to finish and there's not going to be a lot of time. Now some people do finish and they have time, but if you're finishing and you have time, unless you're getting 1 to 2 wrong per section, which some of us are, then going back probably doesn't make sense. It probably means that you're going too fast, right? And you shouldn't be finishing so quickly and then having that time to go back. Really, you should be slowing down and either not finishing or just finishing at the very end. So what that means is that for the vast majority of us, going through and flagging, maybe it's to go back to rethink about something, but in most cases it's just flagging so that we can review the questions when we're done with the section and we have more time. Now, it's not going to help you on test day, but most of our time is spent getting ready for test day and not test day itself. Tonight we're going to do a time section on paper, so we don't really have a way to flag, but you can just circle the question number, right? So circle question 15 or whatever. When you get to the end, you said you hide the answer choices so you don't see what your answer choices were, and then what do you do?
I usually try and, the one that I got wrong, I usually try and see if I can pick a new answer.
Okay. So this is the first thing you do is you indicate to yourself which questions you got wrong by turning on the wrong indicator.
Right. Yeah.
But you hide the answers that you chose, so you have no idea what you chose, and you just know you got it wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is going to differ for everyone to some extent because it kind of depends on how well you're doing. But another option is right when you're done with the section is you don't indicate to yourself whether you got it right or wrong. You just go to the questions that you flagged. So tonight when we're doing this test on paper, you just go to the questions that you circled, right? And you say, okay, there was something that made me feel uneasy about the answer that I chose. And so what do I think now? Now that the time pressure's off, can I answer this question? Would I stick to the answer that I chose during the time test, or would I now change it? And that's immensely helpful because if you're unsure, if there's something about the question that's making you uneasy about the answer that you chose, maybe there's something that you're missing, right? Maybe you're debating between 2 answer choices that are wrong, and that's why you're just like, I really don't like these. And you quickly dismissed an answer that's correct, and you need to go back and figure that out. If you can go back and figure that out on your own, you're going to take a lot more away from that question than if you just look up the correct answer or something like that, and then you're like, oh, it's B. Well, as soon as we see the correct answer, even myself included, even after doing this for so many years, it's easy to start just kind of being like, yeah, that makes sense, and thinking that you get it when you don't. And the reason I know that I do that is because when these random difficult questions come up and it's like I'm struggling with it and then I pick the wrong answer or I pick the right answer but I'm not totally sure. Either way, whether I picked the right answer or the wrong answer, there was some uncertainty, right? There's some lack of clarity, and I'm going and I look at the correct answer and I'm like, oh, B, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And it's like we start talking about it in class and someone's like, well, D, and I was like, oh, yeah, I was sent it by D, but B is definitely right and we're talking about it and it's like, no, actually, I don't fully understand why it's right, because now that you're asking me these questions, you're kind of revealing my own lack of knowledge, right? So if you go to a question that you flagged and you have no clue whether you got it right or wrong, and then you start digging into it and try to figure out what your uncertainty came from or where that uncertainty is coming from, you're much more likely to learn something from that question. Now, at some point, you got to figure out which ones you got wrong, and you want to review those. But basically, I'm saying is that when you review, you kind of have 2 stages. One is to review the questions that you flagged before you have any clue whether you got them right or wrong. And then you may commit to the same answer that you chose before, or you may change your answer. But see what happens. Then look up the right answer, right? The second stage is to look at all the ones that you got wrong and say, okay, You could either redo them without knowing what the correct answer is, or you could just go ahead and look up the right answer and start reviewing it from there. Right now, obviously, depending on how many questions you're getting wrong, you may not be able to drag this review process out as much, right? The more questions you're getting wrong, the more you're just going to jump and try to figure out what the correct answer is and learn from that. But the fewer questions you get wrong, it's almost like review takes the same amount of time because now you're holding yourself to a higher standard, right? You're like reviewing the ones that you flagged, you're looking at the ones that you got wrong, but not looking up the correct answer, trying to figure it out on your own and so forth, right? Now, one thing that a lot of people do when they review questions that they got wrong is they start, I would say the first thing that they do is they try to understand why the correct answer is correct. And that's good. You want to figure out why that's correct. But a component of that is figuring out why the wrong answer is wrong. And that's where a lot of people kind of fall off. They okay, yeah, A makes a lot of sense. It's like, okay, well, a lot of these correct answers are correct for one of two reasons. Either they're correct because they're better than B, A is better than B, but B still works. This is classic in strengthening questions. Which one following, if true, most strengthens the conclusion? You know, people may choose B even though A is correct, and they're right. B does strengthen. It just doesn't strengthen it as much, right? And so then you want to figure out why. Why doesn't it strengthen it as much as A? Another problem is that sometimes answer choices just don't work. So they think it's a second best answer, but it actually doesn't even work. If you get rid of answer choice A, B would still be wrong. It doesn't strengthen it at all, but they think it does. So you want to focus on the correct answer, why it's right, but you also want to focus on the wrong answer that you chose at least and figure out why that's wrong. So that's two things, right? Now, a third thing is you want to figure out why didn't I see that during the test? Because there's a whole range of explanations for that. Sometimes it's, well, this question, it's like, oh, duh, like I get this, I've seen this before, I understand false contrapositives or whatever, right? And so then you're like, was I distracted? Was I rushing at this moment in the test? Can I remember what happened? Was I too confident and I didn't check all 5 answer choices? I don't know. Like, just try to remember, right? But then in other cases, you're looking at this answer choice A and you're like, oh, it's kind of tough. I don't know that I could have seen that before, but now I kind of understand, and so hopefully in the future I'll catch that. But what I'm trying to say is that you want to focus not only on the logic, which is what we're doing when we're focusing on answer choices A and B, you also want to focus on your process. Like, what did you do, or what would you do differently if you were to encounter this question again? Like, imagine you could go back and tell yourself right before you did this question some like strategic piece of advice, but you wouldn't say, oh, the answer is A, right? Like, that's, you just can't do that. But you can tell yourself, like, hey, slow down on this question, or find the conclusion before you go into the answer choices, because this is a strengthening question. At the end of the day, strengthening questions strengthen the conclusion. And if I just focused on that, that would have made the answer much more obvious. Like, what kind of strategic advice would you give yourself? And that becomes the concrete takeaway, right? That's the piece of advice that you can then apply to a future question. Like, sometimes we're so obsessed with like just trying to understand why A makes sense that we don't necessarily get the bigger takeaway that can then be applied in your next time section. That's tough. With asking people in one-on-one tutoring, it's like, okay, well, what were you doing? And a lot of people, I don't remember what I was doing. Well, partly that's a function of how long ago did you take the section. Now tonight we're going to do a section and then you're going to review it right after. So hopefully there'll be it'll be easier to remember what you were doing at that time. But the interesting thing is if you start asking yourself these questions, and there are 3 of them, why is the correct answer correct? Why is the wrong answer wrong? And why did I miss this? What was I doing that led me to miss this during the section? You start to become more aware of your behavior as you're going through the section. You start realizing what you're doing at different moments because you're asking yourself that when the section is over, right? And that makes you a better analyzer of your own steps. Now, one other thing that happens a lot when people start reviewing a section and they start asking themselves these questions, including, what did I do, or what could I have done differently? Could I have gotten this right if I had just done something a little differently? Is they tend to focus on a couple things. One, they tend to say, oh, I should have read more carefully. Now, that's probably true, but you might want to get a little bit more concrete. So when you say you needed to read more carefully, is that because you missed a word? That's a more concrete identification of a problem, right? Then you can be like, oh yeah, I missed the word not. It's so small. So when I'm reading, watch out for words like not. Not is a very common word to miss, by the way, on the LSAT. It's very annoying because it makes the answer entirely wrong or entirely correct, right? And you're like, oh, that's it, that's stupid. And then you're like, oh, no, that's it, because I missed the not. Or by read more carefully, do you mean that you read all the words, but you didn't take time to think about what they meant? Right? That's a different kind of read more carefully. That's, oh, I read the first sentence, yeah, and I just kept going forward. I should have just thought for a second, and then that would have made sense to me. Right? So try to get as specific as possible. The last thing is, when you're coming up with a takeaway, try to frame it in positive language. Not because I care about you feeling good about yourself. That's not what I mean. I mean, I want you to feel good about yourself, but I don't mean positive as in, happy. I mean positive as in what you're going to do differently, not what you're not going to do. Right? Like if you say, oh, I'm not going to rush, that's negative. So what are you going to do? You're going to give every question the time that it needs. You're going to focus on the question that you're working on as opposed to thinking about finishing the section. Try to think about what you are going to do and try to do that differently. Now, at the end of a section, how many concrete takeaways do you think you could glean from one section? Several, yes. The vague, subjective term, several, some, yeah. At least one.
Yeah, at least one.
I'd hope at least one, unless you got the section done perfectly and had no doubts about any of your choices and maybe a couple extra minutes to spare, right? And smile at your colleagues. Oh, still working. That's not the case for us, right? As we're going through these sections, there's always something that we can take away. So I would say in any section, it's not unreasonable to walk away with 5 or 6 takeaways. Right? And if you write them down, you're much more likely to remember them the next time you're going through a section. So another thing that happens too is that test scores go up and down. Right? I'm imagining that we had to have experienced this. There was a student a long time ago, I forgot his name now. Oh, no. I knew I'd remember his name because it was special for the field. His name was Justice. Right? Anyways, that was his name. And he got I think a 148 the first time he took a diagnostic test. Most people, when they start the class, they score between 140 and 155, somewhere in that range. There's definitely people who are above that and people below that, but I would say the vast majority of the class is in that range, and then they kind of work up from there. Anyways, he got 1 point more correct. His LSAT score went up 1 point every time. And he took 14 tests or something like that. And it almost became nerve-wracking by the end, because he's like, look at this, man. It's I've taken 12 tests and each time it goes up 1. Now it's I have this expectation that I have to go up 1 or it's gonna my whole mojo is gonna be broken. And I can't remember if the last few tests he kept that going, but it was weird to look at his results. But that is weird. And most people it's up, down, and there's a lot of volatility, and there's a lot of stress associated with that, right? Oh, my score went down 5 points this week, or 8 points, and it's pretty much close to the score I got when I started this class, and I don't even know what the purpose of life is, and I put in all this time and effort, and it's done me nothing, right? It's a very natural response, but regardless of what the truth is. I mean, if you've seen your score go up and down, but it's generally going up overall, kind of like the stock market, right? It's volatile, but it's going up. Then you're making progress. And even though the most recent practice test that you took is close to your diagnostic score, your diagnostic score is not that's not even a good representation of where you started, because who knows, that could have been a good day or a bad day, right? And so all we know is like this is a bad score. It's probably the bottom. It's probably the lowest score you're gonna get ever. And how much of that was you were tired that day, you were unfocused, you were trying something new, you were trying to go faster in sections, who knows? But my point in saying all this is that instead of worrying too much, I know it's hard, it's easier said than done, but try to refocus less on the score and more on every question you got wrong, and see that as an opportunity to learn. Because those questions are generally going to fall into two categories. They're either going to be, I totally get this and I messed it up on that day or during this time section for some stupid reason, and I need to try to figure that out. And then figure that out so that next time you're taking this time section, you don't make stupid mistakes that you could otherwise get correct. Or it's a hard question that you would have got wrong anyways, and learn from it, right? And if you think about those two categories of questions, if you got 15 wrong in a section, which is a lot, and your score drops, and you're just really anxious about that, right? But 10 of them were dumb mistakes. You don't want to say dumb, just say inadvertent, okay? Things that were due to a lack of focus or tiredness or something else, right? Some misguided strategy for that particular section or day. Then that's great news, because your rebound is going to be pretty quick, right? Okay, I can get these. These questions make sense to me. I just need to focus on the questions as I'm going through the section next time I take a section. But if 12 of them are like mind-boggling, then, well, let's figure out why they're mind-boggling and try to understand the logic behind it. Because the other thing about unlocking logic as opposed to process is that once you understand that logic, then it becomes a lot easier to answer all questions that tap into that same logic, right? So both types of questions indicate different problems, but they're both like resolvable. And the more you learn from them, the better you're going to do in your next section. All right, that's a lot to throw out at you, but does anyone have any questions about any of that? Yes?
I sort of had a question about going from test to test and section to section.
Yeah.
So you talked about sometimes like you might do worse on a section if you try a new strategy. Like on this past week, I tried doing the reading comprehension questions that had the passages with the most questions first.
Yep.
And it like kind of threw off my mojo, and I did worse than I usually do on it. Do you
Okay.
think it's a good idea to occasionally, like, even if it doesn't seem like a significant change, like maybe try something new on a section you want to work on, like I'm going to do something totally different this time?
So two things about that. One is, I don't know that I would do something totally different, but I think it's okay to try different things, and especially when you're doing time sections outside of a time test, because that's like an opportunity to do it and then immediately review it and try to assess, like, okay, well, was my success or failure here due to that change, or just, man, actually these questions are kind of easier? Because you also have to be careful though, right? You can read too much into like one section goes better. Sometimes, people write in, they're like, oh, I just read your strategies about reading comp and I did this section and I just like aced it. And it's like, wow, that's really good. I hope it's due to the strategies, but there's an element of chance here. So, it would be better to hear about this after you had done it for several sections. But the flip side of that too is that sometimes people will try a new strategy and then their score will drop and they'll say, oh, this is not a good approach. But maybe your accuracy has gone up, and so actually in the long run it is a better approach. So I do think it's good to try new things, and I would try them in time sections, and then on test day just do what you think is working the best based on the time sections you've done. If it's a strategy that's applicable to an individual game or passage or LR question, you can experiment with drilling even faster, right? Because you can be like, okay, well let me go into the passage and just try to focus on reading without taking notes, or whatever it is that you're going to try to do, or take notes if you want to go the other direction, right? And then give that a shot in drilling. If it seems like it's working, then try it in time section, and then try that in a test. Any other questions? Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to do a time section, And then I'm going to give you time at the end to go back and review the questions that you circled. And those are essentially like the questions that you flagged. And if you're not finished, though, I would keep going through the section and try to finish. Now, once you're done reviewing the questions that you flagged, or if you didn't have time to go back and review them, if you're just finishing the section, once everybody's done with the section or reviewing the questions that they flagged, some of us will probably be waiting for others. So I would suggest doing some drilling in the Demon or something like that, or just chill. And then we'll take a break and we'll talk about them as a group, but don't look up the correct answers. So that way you can debate with your neighbor in the absence of knowing what's correct. But then as soon as you're done debating that question with your neighbor, look up the right answer. What I don't want you to do is I don't want you to go through the whole section debating and then be like, okay, let's figure it out. No, like talk about a question and then be like, okay, well, D, B, F, okay, that's what we're debating. I think B is better for this reason, and then look up the right answer right then. And then if you're wrong, then you can keep going with that discussion as opposed to like doing a bunch of discussions and then coming back and doing them all over again. Sound good? Okay, you guys excited for a time section? Mildly, kind of.
Ben,
Yeah.
are you going to give us a 5-minute warning?
I will give you a 5-minute warning. Yeah. So on the test, you don't get that, but you get the the pop up. Yeah. Medium excitement.
I wish I could get to medium.
Yeah. Tough day.
Tough week.
Tough week.
Yeah.
Wait, isn't it Monday?
Last week.
Oh, okay. This week is just.
Monday, it feels like.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that happens. Okay. So test 87. That's what we're gonna do. Let's see here.